Hello and good evening to the Hibs Observer evening briefing, where we look back at the transfer window and yesterday's deadline day. The evening after the morning after the night before, you might say. The Hibs Observer is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find them on S1 Jobs, so start your search today. No indication of whether we can look for a centre forward in that search, but that was the main talking point of yesterday's transfer deadline day. Was Hibs' ultimately failed attempt to bring in Lyndon Dykes on loan from Birmingham City. I'm Patrick McPartlin. I'm joined by Craig Nisbet and Matty Fairnie to look back not only at yesterday's rather dramatic deadline day, but also the transfer window as a whole. 7 signings in total brought in, including Dan Barlaser, who came in late on from Middlesbrough on a season-long loan. So Matty, I'll come to you first. Deadline day always promises quite a lot. It always, gives the impression of being a very dramatic final day. It looked like it wasn't going to be that dramatic until it was, and then we're left at the mercy of the updates coming from Easter Roads, and it all seemed to be good. We were expecting white smoke, and then nothing. So how big a sort of a miss is it to not have somebody like Lyndon Dykes joining Hibs for the remainder of the season?
I think where it's a miss is that David Gray's been on record to say that he wanted a centre forward in, and I think when you look at the profile of the squad, he would have wanted somebody in the mould of Kieran Bowie, so that we've got a sort of ready-made replacement for him. I think Dykes fit the bill perfectly. I think he would have been a terrific signing for us, but I'm kind of reluctant to criticise the club for it. Like, I think last night, in the sort of the heat of the moment when we never signed, and it became apparent it was due to like a difference in what Birmingham wanted us to pay in wages and what Hibs were prepared to pay. You kind of thought, how can we be in this position again? We had the Luke McCowan transfer saga where I think everybody and their uncle knew that Celtic were going to come in for him, but Hibs still pushed to get that chance, transferred them right up to the wire. And again last night, even at the back of 10 o'clock, folk were reporting that the talks were still ongoing, but I think we've since learned that Birmingham sort of moved the goalpost very late in the day, and I think Hibs very much thought that the deal was there to be done, and then Birmingham's figure was sort of unpalatable with Hibs, and I think when that happens, you're well within your rights to pull out from a deal, and I think Hibs are better signing nobody in that moment than stretching a budget that we can't afford. Obviously, we can look at the free agent market now to see if there are alternatives. But I think Dykes would have been a great signing. It's not the end of the world that we've not got him, though.
Yeah, I think if you look back to last season and Dwight Gale coming in, I think after the transfer window, I think a couple of weeks afterwards, obviously he had a really good impact, not just on the team but on his fellow players. And we've already seen this summer Hibs picking up Grant Hanley from the free agent market as well. So there are deals to be found there, or gems to be unearthed, if you like. Not sure you can call signing Dwight Gale unearthing a gem. It's not as if nobody knew who he was, but I think quite often people almost dismiss the free agent markets because they think, oh, it's people that nobody wants to sign, so they're going to be damaged goods, or there's going to be some baggage or whatever. But I think the club has shown that they're prepared to go down that route in the past, and I wouldn't put it past them to go down there again if there's somebody out there who they feel can come in and sort of impact the team in the same way that Gale and Hanley have in the past sort of year or so. Craig, just come to you. I think it's more kind of tactical focus, seems only right. We saw sort of how Kieran Bowie and Nikola Kurevic kind of dovetailed last season. They didn't really play together all that much, but I think because of Kieran Bowie's injury, obviously it wasn't really until the tail end of the season where we started to see that rotational thing going on. Did you sort of envisage Dykes coming in to do a sort of similar role as Kurevic last season, or did you see it as being that but also a little bit extra?
Well, it would have been really intriguing because I think like everything Matty said was spot on there, and I was surprised that we were linked with like a player of that calibre in terms of he would be coming up on loan and expecting game time, expecting to play, and especially if we were covering a bit of the wages, it still would have been, I would have guessed, quite significant anyway. It's a wee bit like Grant Hanley coming in at the moment and Warren O'Hora performing really well and kind of not getting in the team, and that'll give David Gray, I'm sure, at some point a headache now that Europe's done and it's just these league games coming up. So I was quite surprised with Dykes coming in and potentially coming in. And now at the time last night, I was thinking, him and Bowie will be battling for position. But I did think, well, if Bowie's fit, probably would want Bowie to play most weeks. But is Dykes then going to be happy sitting on the bench? Are we going to be happy? Is Gray going to be happy with that? So similar to Matty, what you're saying there, I'm not gutted that it never happened, because I think it would have given us quite an interesting headache potentially going forward. And I'm not sure playing those two together maybe would have worked in some games, but I feel like Gray's he likes having that sort of Swiss Army knife approach to the front three, where we can play a 2 and a 1, a 1 and a 2. We can switch people on and off, and if you put Dykes and Bowie up there, you're pretty much going to go long, aren't you, and going to play in that. So I think we'll go in the free agent market, and I think even having somebody maybe a bit older who's maybe not looking for game time, who's happy to come off the bench for the last half an hour, 25 minutes, I think that probably suits us. And then probably just finally I know Gray is big on the squad culture and the dynamics, isn't he? So again, he'll want to bring in the right people. Obviously, Dykes was probably highlighted as a good person, somebody who'd come in and fit the mould in the team, but I'm sure we'll be able to go and replicate that in the free agent market. And I still think that's a gap that we need to fill going into the season now.
You sound like you've had a look at the free agent market and you've seen sort of one or two that fit the bill.
Well, listen, in the summer I was all for Andy Carroll. That was my dream signing. But he was at Wembley when I was at Oasis. We were in the standing section, but I never managed to bump into him, but I would have tried my best. But you see it, it sort of changes. Obviously, players get picked up as you go, and when you follow the sort of the PFA thing that goes through. Some of the names that were in recently, actually, at one point, Sam Cosgrove was in it, but I think he's now signed for Auckland. He's there, and he was 28, 29. I thought that maybe wouldn't have been a bad pick up, somebody that knows the league. He's had loads of injury problems. I think Connor Wickham's maybe still in it. He's still kicking about, sort of in his early 30s. So, there's Assombalonga was in it as well, I think, when I last checked. So there's definitely bodies there, and I think it'll be a case of just taking stock and going, right, what can we bring in? Can we get somebody in like we did with Dwight Gale for the year, just to come in and play that role? And I'm really confident with Gray and even just Malky Mackay and the transfer and how we've picked up players recently. I think there's a lot of good faith now between the fans and the judging the players that we've signed and how they've come in. So I'm fairly confident that we'll be able to get something done.
It's almost like an extension of the excitement of deadline day, is waiting to see if there are any sort of players who can be picked up. And obviously it's one of those where you're kind of hoping that players don't get injured. You're hoping that you don't have to be sort of more active than you're planning to be in the free agent market. But as said, Hibs have done it before, and with a fair amount of success with Dwight Gale. Grant Hanley, I think his pedigree speaks for itself. Obviously, he only played a handful of games so far, but I think we can see him being a good option going forward. Almost under the radar on deadline day, and obviously confirmed earlier today. But the signing of Dan Barlaser from Middlesbrough on a season-long loan was his seventh and final signing of the window. Primarily defensive midfielder, started his career at Newcastle and seemed to be playing a bit more as a number 10 in his earlier years before kind of moving back to that sort of a more defensive role. Seemed to play the bulk of his minutes for Middlesbrough as a number 6 last season, and I think part of the season before, and this season has not been able to kind of force his way into first team plans. He's been an unused substitute for all 5 of their competitive games so far, and I think Middlesbrough well stocked in central midfield, not unlike Hibs. But I think somebody it's sort of a signing that sort of fits what Hibs have been doing recently. He's got that championship experience. I think he's 28 as well, so he's at that sort of more experienced end of the scale, and somebody who can maybe come in and sort of fill that number 6 role that David Gray's been very keen to fill for pretty much most of the summer. I think obviously a lot of pressure on him because I think he'll almost be looked on as the Triantis replacement, which is probably a bit unfair. And it happened to Miguel Chaiwa as well. When he came in, everyone assumed he was going to be a replacement for Neto Triantis. I think in the end it was one of those situations where you can't sort of replace like with like. And I think the signings they've made in the midfield this summer are almost aimed at replicating what they had with Triantis with different players. So I haven't had a huge amount of time to have a look at Barlaser in any sort of great detail yet. I'm not sure if you two have. But it does sort of seem very much like a signing that it sort of ticks a lot of boxes for Hibs in terms of, the experience, the position, having the right character as well. What were your thoughts, Matty, when you saw that sort of coming through late on?
I think the fact that it almost flew under the radar and was announced the next day, and it's he's not with the greatest of respect, like a spectacular name, coming in with a lot of excitement. I think probably the comparisons with Triantis will probably be played down somewhat. The first thing I did obviously was went on YouTube to try to look for a highlights reel, and there was two videos that I watched, and they were the least highlights reel you could possibly imagine. There was very little in the way of pinging the ball into the top corner, and it was brilliant. There's a little caption at the top of the screen that said Barlaser pass like 70 minutes, and it was literally I'm paying a pass in 70th minute. And that's his highlight reel was all like defensive positioning, and it was a clip of him in a defensive position. He just did all the things that he said that he was doing, but he did them all very effectively, all without fuss. His passes all found their man. They were played in front of people and not behind them, and things like this. They were good quality. I can't say I closed the laptop and thought I can't wait to see him play. But at the same time, I wasn't concerned at all. So I think it's one of these ones just to wait and see how he does. I do like the fact it's called Dan as well, because you have that potential for the sort of the Alan Partridge Dan, for players trying to get his attention when he's got a man on or something. So that's something to look forward to.
A nice bonus. I was actually thinking the last time. So come in.
No, I was just going to say. I also think that Barlaser is quite a cool second name as well. So I think he's got quite a lot going for him. To be fair.
You're building him up. You're putting more pressure on him.
Well, it's to be fair, similar to Matty. He obviously can do a little bit of sort of research on him, but he obviously played under Michael Carrick for a good chunk of time. Who you would hope knows his centre midfielders, so you would trust that kind of judgment. I know from like seeing some of Middlesbrough and Michael Carrick, like he played very open and stuff like that, so a very open style of play. And I know Barlaser, he didn't really feature too much in the last couple of seasons. So, but he's obviously had that pedigree at played at Rotherham as well. So they're quite a yo-yo team up and down the league. So he's obviously been in teams that have done well, and then been in teams in the Championship that have struggled. So you would like to think that he comes up going, he's well equipped to deal with the sort of games that we'll have. And from what I've read, he actually seems to be like a bit of a ball playing midfielder. So I reckon they're hoping he'll maybe fall into that kind of Triantis. Listen, Triantis like out of possession was never bulletproof. Quite often would pick up a yellow card here and there, and he definitely grew into it as the season went on. And maybe that's the same for Barlaser as well. He maybe step in, and it's quite a big bit of competition in that central midfield. But I definitely think there's a spot up for grabs. So I think we needed a body in there. It's maybe not like the place we definitely needed to strengthen, but I think if we can get somebody in, it's on a loan. If it doesn't work out, fine. He goes back down the road. But I think it seems like a decent bit of business.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's a good sign or whatever, but I think back to this time last year when it had been all about him trying to get Luke McCowan, and then they signed Jack Iredale, and again it was just this, a left back from Bolton. And there was just a bit of a kind of a muted response, probably be the kindest way of putting it. And we've seen obviously how he's come onto game, and here we are 12 months later, he's getting a call up for Australia. So I imagine Barlaser will be hoping if he can follow that trajectory, then he probably won't get called up for Australia. But just that sort of going from being a sort of relatively unheralded signing to maybe being just a reliable body, a reliable presence in that midfield. Just going to put this question up here. Somebody's saying, I take it David Gray doesn't think Alassane Mane is going to cut it. It's a bit of a funny one, that, for me, because he obviously arrived in January, and we were told that there was going to be this sort of like settling in period just to kind of get used to the Scottish game. And then I think, he started that game against Rangers on the last day of the season, looked quite tidy, looked quite comfortable with the pace of the game and everything. But then, I mean, personally, I felt there were a few times during pre-season where he looked a little bit, I think rusty's maybe the best way of putting it. Just, a little bit slack with passes, or, maybe trying sort of passes that weren't on. And, I know it's fine, it's a pre-season friendly, but my sort of gut feeling was, if that's happening in pre-season friendlies, then there can't be that sort of level of trust to put him into a competitive game. And we have sort of seen him fleetingly, I think, in competitive fixtures since. There was interest in him over the summer. There may still be interest in him. I think it wasn't a definite that he was going to be staying at Easter Road. I think, as always, as with most players, Hibs will look to entertain approaches for players if it's right for all parties, and if it's not, then they won't. I think we saw that with I've seen that with Ellie Yuan, who was obviously linked with that move to Legia Warsaw. Talks there broke down. There were other clubs in for him, but again, Hibs having to look after themselves, felt there wasn't anything to really tick a box. So, I mean, Matty is a funny one because he's not had an awful lot of time, to kind of show what you can do. But when you consider who Hibs have brought in midfield, they brought in the likes of Chaiwa, they brought in Jamie McGrath, and obviously you got Dylan Levitt starting in there as well. So I don't know if it's so much that he's not going to cut it. It's just maybe he's not kind of kicked on as much as he might have hoped. That's the kind of impression I get. Come to you first, Matty. What have you made of Alassane and the kind of brief glimpses we've seen of him?
I think what his issue is that he's not a particular type of midfielder that like you wouldn't liken him to Dylan Levitt or to Triantis or as a number 10. He sort of is a bit of an all-rounder, and I think Gray likes to have a bit more specialists in the positions that he's picking. It's an interesting one though, because Gray's obviously trusted him in some of the biggest games we've had. So he came on away to McPartlin. He came on, from memory, he came on away to Partizan. Mm-hmm. So these were important times in the game where he's been put on to do a job, and he's done the job. When he started against Livingston, I thought he was terrific in that game. It almost took the shine off of Cleege and Chaiwa that afternoon. I thought he played really, really well. So I think there's a place for him in the squad, but I just don't know if Gray knows what that place is, and when he plays, whether he fits into the system that Gray likes to play. And I think that's probably the negative that Manny has to overcome, is he needs to be really, really good at one thing, I think, for Gray to see where he sits in the system. And I think he's almost like a victim of being like decent at too many things, if that makes sense.
It does. I have to, like, from my point of view, what I've seen of Chaiwa so far looks a little bit like that's what they were hoping for from Manny, and he just maybe hasn't quite clicked for whatever reason. I've talked about this a lot, and especially the last 24 hours, but Malcolm Mackay talking about this kind of 7 out of 10 signings need to be a success. Not every signing is going to sort of tick every box. It's not going to be successful, but it's about sort of trying to get, the majority right. And I just wonder whether, this is somebody who's looked like a good prospect or looked like a good option, and for whatever reason, it just hasn't worked out. Transfer windows in some countries are still open, in some cases, I think, for up to another kind of 6 days. Don't ask me to list them, I can't remember. But there are countries in Europe that are still have transfer windows open for, at least until next week. So, still the possibility that something could be done, but I think also possible that, or I suppose it's maybe looking more likely that he's going to stay and just be one of the many central midfielders that Hibs have on their books at the moment. But just, moving on to the midfield in general, obviously Joe Newell's still out injured, and then you've got Josh Mulligan, you've got Jamie McGrath, you've got Dylan Levitt, you've got Miguel Chaiwa. It's a wee bit of an embarrassment of riches at the moment, isn't it, Craig?
It is, yeah, and I think just on Manny briefly, I think he obviously he was a settling in period. He had an awful start when he got red carded so early on, and then basically that meant he couldn't compete for a place, and then Triantis and Levitt just linked, and then they were basically untouchable till the end of the season. So he never really got much of a look in. And I agree with Matt. Like, I thought he was brilliant against Livingston, and he is quite a neat and tidy player. I do think there's times where he can overcomplicate things, and then there's times, certainly out of possession, where he's rash and he gives away fouls, he picks up bookings, and I think that's probably where Gray is trying to work out where to fit him in. I think Levitt just plays first time forward all the time, and it's just like, it's so important. Chaiwa seems to win it and drive forward with the ball, similar to what Mulligan does, and I think Matty's right that Manny sort of floats between these areas, and I think if he does stay, I can see him getting into the team at some point. Like, I definitely think the qualities are there. He maybe just needs a bit of a run of games. But you're right that the midfield is really interesting, because we normally just play with a two, really, and some of those other guys are a bit further forward, maybe playing in the number 10 role, or then if we play sort of like that front three, they sort of have maybe a wider responsibility, like Jamie McGrath usually plays. So we've got quantity. We do also have quality in there as well. But I still think it depends how Barlaser does when he comes in. But we still felt we were still missing something in there to just knit it all together. But certainly, I think it'll be a headache for Gray trying to keep those players happy, especially now with no European. If we had Europe, fine, you've got that Sunday, Thursday rotation, nice and easy to get players in, whereas without that now, it's a different headache for him this season now, with like a big squad full of quality, full players that can come in and not weaken your team, and how to keep them happy throughout the season. So, I think it'll be really interesting challenge for him and his coaching staff.
Yeah, certainly seems that way. And I think you've sort of seen, again, it's one of Gray's preferred phrases when he says the 11 that starts is not the 11 that finishes. And I think, maybe playing the way they do, it's important to sort of have, a kind of clutch of midfielders, so that if you need to replace both of them during the game, you can do that, and you're not sort of, weakening the side at all. My kind of feeling from recent games has been, on those occasions that they move Josh Mulligan either to right wing back, or if he doesn't start, then I just sort of feel, kind of like you were saying there, I feel there is something missing in that midfield. And I think it's about kind of getting the balance right, and you've got so many options in there. As you say, it took a wee bit of time last season to kind of land on Levitt and Triantis as this sort of really, probably the best performing combination. And, Lord knows there were a lot of combinations that played in central midfield last season. But I do think it's an interesting one, and I think especially when you consider that, and this will take me nicely into my next point, but the number of people who are a little bit bemused why Gray was so keen to sign another midfielder, kind of feeling perhaps that, obviously we've discussed the centre forward position, but that right wing back might have been another position that he should have been looking at. But having spoken to him at the pre-season training camp in the Netherlands, and sort of speaking to him throughout this European campaign, it was never really mentioned that right wing back or right back, whatever you want to call it, was a position that was kind of high on the shopping list. Does that make sense to the two of you? Can you see what the thinking was there?
I think it does and it doesn't. I think the fact that we've got Chris Cadden there and you've got Megwa still in there, you go, right, well, we've got two players that can fulfill that role, so that makes sense. Then you've seen that when you put Josh Mulligan out there, he can perform very well, and he's very dynamic, and you can take that. So I can see at that point them going, well, unless we can get somebody that can come in and drastically improve that area, we've got two people that we think that can already fulfill it. So I do get that. Maybe signing the extra midfielder means, and now that Chaiwa's come in and done what he's done, it's like, right now we can definitely move Mulligan out there and we can start to give him game time out there. Because I think my worry for Mulligan was, you don't want him to be, I think it's unfair for him to start games centre midfield and end him right wing back. Like, I don't think that's particularly great for his development throughout the season. So you can't, you can do it at the odd time, but I think he needs somewhere settled to build and grow. And I think I could see him really doing a job at right wing back. I really like him out there, and actually being in that wing back role lets him do a lot of like really exciting stuff going forward and almost be like an attacking midfielder, which I'm sure he wants to do. And there is obviously defensive responsibilities, but it's maybe not as not demanding, but in terms of like what Levitt and whoever else is in there have to cover across the pitch, being a two, it's maybe it's a bit more difficult for them. So, Chaiwa plays for his country and right back for his country. Oh, well, there you go. So I mean, there's all these options that. Well, I think that's maybe, when Gray's signing these guys that can come in and fulfil those roles. I know that is something he likes, players that can operate in different areas, and that does make the competition in the squad interesting. But to your question, I can see why that maybe wasn't as big a priority for the transfer market. No,
I think there needs to be space for Megwa as well to make an impression in the team. I think if Hibs are going to be serious about having an effective youth policy, then we need to at some point make a pathway for the players. And I think when you've got Chris Cadden, like, he's good enough for that position to not be a problem. I think Cadden's issue is that Mulligan's better in that position than he is, in my opinion. I think from what we've seen so far this season, when Josh has gone out to the right wing back position, I think he gives us more than Cadden does, both going forward and going back. If I'm honest, I think with that sort of overload in the midfield with players allows Gray to move Mulligan over to that right wing back. And I think if you were prioritising where you were spending your money, the case for a new right wing back is probably pretty weak when you've got those options. Like, you can play Megwa, you can play Cadden, Mulligan, obviously Chaiwa there as well with as we're finding out live, he could play in that position. So yeah, I think it makes sense that they never prioritised. I probably would have liked to have seen one come in, because I prefer Josh in the middle of the pitch.
Yeah, I remember when Hibs signed Mulligan, I think Liam and myself did a video talking about it, and I sort of very confidently said that I felt he was coming in to play right wing back. Just goes to show, don't listen to anything I ever say. I know he has played there on occasion, but I just wonder whether he's almost been used in midfield as a kind of stopgap, because obviously for a while we didn't know what was happening with Triantis, and it's like, will he, won't he? If he comes back, does that then allow Mulligan to move out to right wing back, or is it one of those sort of situations where a player is signed to play a certain position, but then you realise, a little bit like Hibs did with Triantis the first time around, that he was signed as a centre back, and they realised he's not the best in defence, but he is actually pretty good in sort of defensive midfield. Again, it's going back to what happened to Matty Jack all those years ago. Somebody who was fairly or distinctly average in one position turned out to be a revelation in another. But I think Craig, you mentioned there about Megwa, and I think the coaching staff quite like him. A great point about the youth policy. There needs to be that pathway. We've seen a lot of players move on from Hibs in sort of the last maybe 2 to 3 years, especially heading down to England. And partly that is the nature of sort of cross-border transfer these days, but also, the club's maybe not been the best in previous seasons at kind of having that defined pathway to the first team. And for Megwa, he's sort of done his time on the loan circuit with Kelty Hearts, Airdrie, and then part of Thistle last season. He's had his chance under Gray. He's been trusted in some big games, and I think that the main thing is not sort of getting into a situation where he's just kind of filling the bench or he goes out on loan again, because I think he's probably a little bit beyond that. And I suppose it's nice that he's another kind of dual position player where he can play right back, he can play right wing back. He played in a back three for the under-18s when he was first coming through. I think we've even seen him play at left wing back on occasion. So he does have that kind of dual position, or several positions, in fact, that Gray seems to value in a lot of his players. But I think it's kind of understandable that, I think for me, this desire to sort of see another right wing back see a right wing back come in is pretty much fans looking at where the club has improved in other positions. The caliber of players they brought in, Up front, the likes of Thibaut Clige, you're sort of breaking your transfer record. Kieran Bowie coming in as well, spending high six figures on him. And then in midfield, bringing in Mulligan, bringing in McGrath, bringing in Chaiwa, and the effect that they've had. And I think that's maybe, it's maybe one of the sort of issues that Josh Campbell's had. That I think, he's been a bit of a target, a bit of a scapegoat in the game so far that he's played. And I think that maybe just comes down to the fact that the players who are around him now are maybe better than what was there before, and so it maybe gives the impression that he's kind of lagging behind a little bit. So I just wonder whether that's that's kind of an effect, or that's having an effect on fans, that this desire, this aim to improve the team in every position is maybe kind of having an effect on positions that haven't been improved. I can't think of what the term is. Maybe a kind of psychological thing. And also
Lewis, Lewis Miller, that was, we obviously sold him, and I would think it was the right decision. But again, you could, if you imagine he stayed, you could easily see him in that position there, and how he was stepping. I know he played sort of more in the back three at that point, but that was a position he had as well. So I suppose when probably selling him, they were probably then looking around going, right, we'll strengthen these other areas, and actually we've got Cad in. You're spot on, Patrick. Like, Megwa's done his time, and he's not really been given a fair crack, and at times he's been thrown in at kind of random times to and stuff like that, which hasn't, against Rangers and other bits like that, which hasn't been good for his development. And it's like, right, well, let's stand by him now. Let's give him an opportunity. Chris Caddens, I don't think he's not got huge amounts of time left on his deal, is he not? Is he still got?
Cadden just extended, I think so.
2027.
Yeah, I think so.
So a couple of years, and Meg will kind of maybe look at that and go, right, well, I back myself to get in that position, and so I think it's right to give him an opportunity this season, and hopefully he can maybe step in and do that. And obviously we've got Mulligan that can go there, Chaiwa. So I think there's plenty of options out there for us, and I think it'll actually be really interesting to see the battle for that position across the season, because I've got a funny feeling there'll be a lot of twists and turns for that position.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there, and I think that won't be the only position either. I think we saw it maybe to some extent last season, where suspensions or injuries kind of kicked in, and players who'd been sort of almost permanent fixtures all of a sudden found themselves out of the starting lineup and struggling to get back into it. So as you say, I think some interesting battles coming up, some interesting competition for places. We could sit here talking all night about the squad, but just as a whole, when you look at not just who's come in, but who Hibs have managed to hold on to, the likes of Rocky Bashiri, Junior Hoylett, and also who's left, or the numbers that have left, it's even with the sort of disappointment of not getting Dykes on the final day, it's been probably one of the better transfer windows in recent seasons, I would say. I don't know if that's just sort of me, because I'm covering it, because I'm working every single day on this. That's what it looks like from here, and I'm actually wildly off base. But I'd be interested if you guys sort of think the same, if you think that it has been overall a sort of strong transfer window, the Dykes debacle aside.
I think it's been excellent. I think Craig made the point right at the start about the recruitment guys having a sort of bit of credit in the bank, and I think that credit comes to the fact that we have signed so well. And I think you look at, we've broke our transfer record to bring in Clige. We've got Chaiwa, who's got Champions League experience. McGrath from one of our rivals at Aberdeen. Mulligan is an up-and-coming prospect, again from another top-flight club. We've brought in a Scotland international and Grant Hanley. A goalkeeper to challenge Smith. There's quality right across the pitch, as well as maintaining, keeping Rocky and Hoylett, as you mentioned, Patrick. I think the squad's in a really good place. I think Dykes would have been icing on the cake, but I don't think he was the quality of the cake didn't live or die on his signing. If I keep a cake analogy going for some reason. But I think overall, we did our extra time episode this evening talking about this, and the conclusion we came to was very much that it's a really good window. The squad's in a really good place, and I think even when you see how competitive we have been against some really good opponents this season already, it speaks for itself. We've got the options there. The fact that we did that and then we're able to rotate the team largely for the game against Livingston, we still made a good few changes for the game against St Mirren at the weekend. In fact, you look at the first round of subs there, and coming off the bench we had Bowie, Mulligan and McGrath. That speaks for itself. Like the squad's in a really good place, and I think the club have done a great job in putting it together.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think they've, last season we built like a really strong, obviously the culture that Gray brought in and the coaching staff, and then just that togetherness and, all the moments we had with the players after these big games and that, crazy run that we were on. And I think what you wanted to do was just, can we just keep the structure of that and just add to it? And I think that we've done that. And as Matty said, and also we got a lot of people out the club that were, just they are sitting on a wage, which fine, if that's how it happens in your career, I understand that, and that's not their fault. It was just sort of shoddy recruitment from us. But I think over the last couple of seasons now, we've managed to get rid of that dead wood that was obviously having an impact, because they were obviously trying to be sensible with the wages and the contracts and things like that. And now, Matty's right, when you look at our bench going into some games, you're like, wow, lots of options. And that for the players, there's loads of competition, so it's driving up the standards, and it should put us in a really good position for the season ahead.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. We are in an international break at the moment, so I think there'll be several fingers, toes, everything crossed down East Mains to make sure that all the players who are away with their countries come back free of injury and ready to hit the ground running when the domestic games come around again. But we will leave it there for this evening. Thanks to Matty and Craig for joining me to talk about that transfer deadline day and the window as a whole. We'll have a lot more content about the transfer window on the Hibs Observer website this week, so do keep an eye on the site throughout the week. £1 for 6 months to subscribe if you haven't already. hibsobserver.co.uk/subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated, and means we can keep bringing you videos such as this one, as well as all the content on the website. So I'll wrap it up there. Thank you for joining me. Thanks, Craig. Thanks, Matty. And we will see you again soon.